Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt. Als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht. Komm dir entgegen.
Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm Manu and he's Stefan Biankowski. And Stefan, how's it going?
Yeah, can't complain. It's been a really eventful weekend in the Bundesliga. I somehow managed to get a little sunburnt this evening. I had this today, not today, actually yesterday. I went on a hill walk, and I mean, this is just how white I am, that I can go on a hill walk and it was completely overcast the whole day. Not a ray of sun came through. I was away, it was like a 14k walk. I was away for like 2 or 3 hours, and I got home and we were out with some friends and they came back for lunch. And we're sitting having some lunch, and everyone said, "Stefan, you're completely sunburnt." And I'm like, "How?" I didn't even. But yeah, that's just how pale I am. I am Polish, you know, and my dad, the thing is, my dad tans very well. He deals with the sun very well. That's obviously the Polish side. But my mum's from Irish stock, and honestly, they can't deal with the sun at all. So. It was quite funny. I was on Indian TV today doing some Bundesliga stuff, and I was terrified of them asking if I was sunburned, and I'd have to explain that I was sunburned from despite the lack of sun. Like, yeah, that's what it's like here in Scotland. We get sunburned even when the sun doesn't come out.
Yeah, so I did get a slight sunburn this weekend too, but I'm in California, so.
Yeah, see that's a legitimate excuse.
But it wasn't the face; it was just my arms, and it's for the silliest thing because I forgot to put on sunscreen. So if you're listening to the show, always put on sunscreen because it happens really quickly.
Can I see very briefly before we move on from this? This is something I saw like on an Instagram reel or something when I was waking up this morning. Apparently, you're supposed to wear sunscreen on flights. Did you know this?
No.
Yeah,
I fly a lot, so that is good information.
Well, apparently because the UV light obviously comes into the plane windows, and apparently because you're so high up, lack of atmosphere, it's like 20 times more powerful than like a normal amount than the sun that you would get on ground level. So apparently, if you're flying, guys, make sure you put on some sunscreen. Because apparently, I only found out today, but apparently it's pretty important.
Well, yeah, especially if you like me and you fly all the time, like every second weekend. This is important information. That has
or if you're half Irish.
Yeah, half Irish. Obviously, none of this has to do anything with the Bundesliga. Although I think a couple clubs did get burned this weekend as well.
Oh, there we go.
So there's your tie into the Bundesliga. And Stefan, it was a really eventful weekend, and we should probably talk about all the results that we had and do it after this quick break.
This episode of the Gegenpressing podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline remains your number one source for all your college basketball betting this season. Get analysis of every play, prop, and point at BetOnline. You'll find the latest odds, bracket contests, team matchups, and game trends at BetOnline. Updated odds for everything from live games, the conference championship, right through the Final Four and championship game. BetOnline is your college basketball headquarters this season. Head to the website today or use the mobile device to sign up and receive 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Be sure to use your promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, BELIEVE to receive your bonus. BetOnline.ag, where the game starts.
So yeah, a couple of clubs got burned really badly. As I said, no one got burned more badly than Hertha. 5-2 against Schalke. I should have done this. This was homework, but I was extremely busy yesterday, hanging out with LAFC and LA Galaxy here in California. So I didn't look up when the last time was when Schalke scored 5 goals. But I think the last time they scored came close was that Matthew Hoppe show in the year they got relegated. I think they won that game 4-0. 5-2. Wow, I know that neither one of us saw this coming, because neither one of us tipped this result. I think we both actually thought that Hertha would probably walk away with the 3 points here, and they did
I said
not.
Schalke.
Oh, you
I
did say
said Schalke.
Schalke. Yes, you said 2-1 Schalke. So I'm in the doghouse. I said Hertha. Yes, so Schalke do get all 3 points, and they think they get it in a way that kind of might resurrect them in this relegation battle. I think what is true, and we both said this, and I think it holds even more true now, is that the team that would lose this relegation battle would be in enormous trouble. I think now that you add the manner of the defeat, the way Hertha completely collapsed here, and the fact that they then released Sandro Schwarz from his head coaching duties and replaced him with Paul Dardai, who's taking his 3rd comeback.
Did you think they just keep Paul Dardai in like a glass cabinet, and then he'd go like a sign above it saying, "In case of emergency, break glass"?
And he just comes out. Yes.
And then after 6 months, he just kind of says, "Look, I'm going to go back to the youth team." It's crazy. It keeps putting out fires for this club.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's going to work this time, though, Stefan, because I followed the press conference this morning and read some of the details. And a few things stuck out to me. First of all, that Kevin Prince Boateng, who we were both baffled that he's actually still playing, and that he's actually still an impact player for this team, which tells you quite a bit about Hertha Berlin and where they are as a club. That he's now part of the coaching staff, right? He's an assistant coach, which I actually think might be a pretty smart move by the club, because he's obviously tied into the club. He's a Hertha youth academy prospect from way back in the day. He identifies with the city of Berlin. His playing career is coming to an end. He does seem like the kind of person and personality that would do quite well as a head coach, I think, right? So maybe kind of shoehorning him into that position makes sense, because he does have the personality to lead. I think maybe reading between the lines here, I think they were kind of actually maybe thinking of giving him the position altogether, but maybe didn't trust him to do it on his own. And I don't know what his coaching license status is, right? That's also an issue. So they did bring back Paul Dardai to sort of help him. We had actually a similar situation once before in the Bundesliga with Matthias Sammer and Udo Lattek. That was back in 2000, when the two of them saved Borussia Dortmund. And then the next year, Borussia Dortmund actually won the title with Matthias Sammer in charge. That's not going to happen here. I'm sorry, Hertha fans. I don't think Hertha is going to be anywhere near winning. Well, they could win the second division title, I guess, with Kevin Prince Boateng in charge. But there is precedent for this, where a player who is still kind of almost on the field walks straight into a head coaching position. I think that is an interesting thing here to note. But the Paul Dardai thing, I mean, that is not exactly the most creative solution, in my opinion, Stefan.
Yeah, it's not, but that's maybe not a bad thing. If you look at some of the creative decisions they've made recently at Hertha, they've been disastrous. Jurgen Klinsmann's probably the most obvious example of that in recent years. And I don't know. I mean, look, first things first. Anyone taking this job on right now is really up against it to actually save Hertha from relegation. I mean, they've got Werder Bremen coming up. They've got Stuttgart, Cologne, Bochum. So there's maybe 3 or 4 games that they could win. Wolfsburg in the last day is also maybe a winnable game, because Wolfsburg haven't looked exactly fantastic recently. But I don't know. I haven't really had much time to process this, because we're literally recording this as Paul Dardai's press conference happened. But I've always quite liked Paul Dardai, in the sense that he's always kind of been just this very low-key club guy. He just gets on with his job. And actually, if you kind of look at his record at the club, his first stint at the club was actually quite impressive as a head coach. I've got the transfer mark page open that shows all the previous head coaches. And in his first spell, he picked up 1.38 points per game, which nobody was able to match that came after him. And then actually when he came back in 2021 as a kind of interim but also full-time, kind of like what we're seeing here, he picked up another respectable 1.23 points per game, which Korkut, Magat, and now Schwartz haven't been either. So I didn't really understand why he kind of gave up the job in the second time, because I actually thought he did a decent job of it. But I also kind of think, if Hertha are beginning to resign themselves to get relegated, I think Dardai is probably a good candidate to kind of take on the job in the second division. He obviously knows the club back to front. He also doesn't really come with a huge amount of expectation, if they were to appoint, I don't know, say like Adi Hutter or something like that. Not that they could get something like that, but I'm just thinking like some generic Bundesliga head coach, maybe would arrive with all sorts of bells and whistles attached.
Yeah.
If it's Dardai, he can just kind of get on with the job without anyone really thinking, oh well, will he stay? Will he go? I mean, he's always going to stick around if they get relegated. He'll probably quite happily just do the job in the second division. And he'd probably do a reasonably good job of it as well if you kind of look at his previous records. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the problem with Hertha. It's not really... the thing about Hertha, I think, is that you kind of look at the decision makers there over the course of the years. Obviously, the ownership structure has changed a lot. The people who make decisions have changed a lot, specifically this season. That's always been the problem. The people making decisions, the people paying or putting the money into the club, they've always been the people making the wrong problems when the situation is if they'd maybe just stuck with Dardai the first time around or the second time around at least, they probably would have been quite comfortable in the Bundesliga now.
Yeah.
The kind of weird thing about this game, actually, having watched it, was that I didn't actually think Hertha played that poorly. Obviously, if someone's just kind of looking at that result on a score sheet, they'll think, wow, Schalke really battered Hertha.
Yeah.
But it wasn't really like that at all, really. It was a game that was 5-2 that could have very easily finished 3-3. If you look at the XG, Schalke had 2.58 to Hertha's 1.72. But I also think, crucially, Schalke scored two really, really important goals. First in the 3rd minute, then the 48th minute. They just kind of completely pulled the wind out of Hertha's sails, because actually, Jovetic pulls one back when it was 2-0 to Schalke just for half time.
Yeah.
It's on his 2-1. Hertha have their tails up, and then Schalke just deliver this another incredible blow. And I think I do kind of feel like I'm from a Schalke point of view, I actually don't think there's a huge amount they should read into this game, because even though it's a decent performance, I think they were quite lucky in the manner of both early goals in both halves, because it allowed them to sit back and play that kind of defensive counter-attacking role that they quite enjoy playing this season under Thomas Rice, and they were able to kind of pick off Hertha. But yeah, Hertha had a number of chances in this game, and it was actually quite an evenly matched game. So bizarrely enough, I'm not sure even... I don't really see the point in sacking Schwartz at this point.
Yeah.
And I didn't actually think Hertha were particularly bad. If they played like that up against, as I mentioned, the likes of Werder Bremen or Cologne or Stuttgart, maybe the Stuttgart's look better, but Bochum or whatever else, then I don't think there's any suggestion that they could pick up points. So it's a weird situation at Hertha right now, as it has been for a long time now. They seem kind of destined to get relegated, but... Yeah. Hey, maybe a stint in the Zweite Bundesliga would be a bad idea.
I mean, we said the same thing about last year when they brought in Felix Magath, right? And he did turn things around, got them into that 16th spot, and then rescued them in the relegation battle against HSV. I'm not sure they're going to be quite that lucky this year. I'm just looking really quickly at the table here, and it's it is only 2 points to Stuttgart, who are on that 16th spot, and that is probably the best bet now. They somehow just get to pray to be 16th and then, have a repeat against HSV, as it looks like. When you look at the second division results, HSV doing everything in their power to finish 3rd. Very lucky, I think, that St. Pauli also slipped, because then otherwise the derby, the Hamburg derby would have been a really big one, right? This weekend, this upcoming weekend. But obviously now Hertha, their 16th spot is their biggest hope, because 5 points with just 6 games to go to Bochum, I think is a really tough task. I thought it was interesting that I mentioned a few of the fundamentals that are really important for him, right? And when he rescued the club last time, that they really need to get back into getting set pieces right, just be defensively sound, just do the basics. And I think that is probably a really good message from him, right? Just think match day to match day, get your job done, focus on the things that you can control, that sort of thing. And it's a very clear message. And I think also for him, as you said, he doesn't really have anything to lose. If they go down, worst case, he just goes back to his youth academy job, right? Which he seems to be enjoying the most anyways, and can just do that. Like, it's like, he's almost unfireable in a sense, right? Like, he has a job at Hertha. He will always have a job at Hertha. Every once in a while, he pops up, break it emergency kind of guy. What I think is, and this is maybe my final thought on this, how does 777 feel about that? You know, the new American partners that have just come in and bought the stake and took the stake over from Lars Windhorst for a lot of money, and also guaranteed more investment to come in, right? And I mean, again, we're just taking this all in as it happens, right? So this might require a deeper analysis further down the road, but how are they going to look at this mess that was presented to them, this prospect of second division football next year? And how will that influence investment into the club? And I think that is a big part of the story here that, you know, we still need to digest, because you look at some of the other teams. I think with the Italian club Genoa, I think they had a similar situation as well. But yet, you know, it is fascinating to watch, because for them to get something back for their money, he had to have to play first division football, right? You know, you look at the television money, you look at the attendance figures and all that. It's just, and like next year you also don't have, what rescued them the last time they went down is that they had the derbies against Union Berlin, right? They wouldn't have that this time, because Union Berlin are doing quite well in the Bundesliga. And then that's a risk as well, because like, you go down now, you lose further ground to the other team in Berlin that's slowly but surely usurping you as the number one club in the city, right? So I think that is a really fascinating part of the story that is yet to unfold. And I wonder how much of the decision to like, you know, break the glass in case of emergency actually came from 7-7 partners.
Yeah, I mean, you would assume that they knew what they were getting involved with Hertha, because it's not like they've invested in, you know, Gladbach or, you know, I don't know, Frankfurt or something like that, and all of a sudden they've just had this historically bad season and found themselves in relegation. I mean, Hertha have been kind of bumbling around the bottom of the table for a number of years now. You know, they finished 16th last season, 14th the year before that, 10th, 11th, 10th. Yeah, they had some decent runs in the top 6 and 8 back, you know, two seasons, but a bit before that, there was 15th, 11th, 16th, and that's when they're kind of yo-yoing between the first and second division. So historically, at least in a modern sense, Hertha are a club who can aspire to maybe be a mid-table Bundesliga side, or maybe aspire to even be a top 8 side, but for the most part, they are a team at the bottom half of the table who always have to deal with relegation. So it'll be a real test of these investors to see if they're genuine or if they're just here to try and make a quick buck, because if they're genuine, they'll look at relegation and say, well, it's not what we had planned, but it's not the end of the world, and maybe it offers an opportunity for them to kind of wipe the slate clean and build something proper. And you couldn't look for a better example in the sense of what Union Berlin have done, where they take things very slowly, they don't get ahead of themselves, they make sure they appoint a head coach first, and that head coach has a very strong say in what happens at the club, so that everything kind of revolves around that. Yeah, and I think Union could do a lot of good just kind of looking towards, Hertha could do a lot of good rather looking at Union and just thinking, well, let's try and walk before we can run. And then before you know it, you are suddenly a top 6, top 4 side like Union Berlin, if you do manage to go your ducks in a row.
No, absolutely. Oh, this is a developing story, so we'll probably keep our eyes on it and see how it develops. I'm pretty sure Hertha fans I wish all the best. Their club is all of a sudden a spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Stefan, we have to move up the table and stay down the table, because VfB Stuttgart, massive point against Borussia Dortmund. Borussia Dortmund slip twice in this game, or to stay on topic or on theme, got burned. This result, I think, hurts Dortmund. I mean, first of all, Stuttgart, fantastic to come back with a man down, right? They lose Mafropanos, a key defender, to a red card. Still managed to come back from a 2-0 deficit. Dortmund then scored. Gio Reyna makes it 3-2. I think in the 92nd or 93rd minute. And then somehow with the last shot of the game, Silas makes it 3-3 in the 97th minute. This is a massive point in the relegation battle, as we pointed out, for Stuttgart. For Dortmund, and we get to Bayern in a moment here because, you know, they were just shaking their heads in disbelief on why they're still 2 points ahead of Dortmund. But for Dortmund, this is a huge slip up. And I think this is also one where it's almost more of a wake up call for them than the Klassiker. Because you look at the post game reactions, and Edin Terzic in the press conference, and I'm paraphrasing here, was quite strict with his team. I don't want to say he threw the team under the bus, but he kind of did. You know, he did question his team's ability to perform. He did question his team's. He didn't use the M word, but it was in the room. You know, you could sense it in the press conference. Mentality was something that was questioned without using the actual word. And I think you look at the reactions of all the different players on the field. This is such a big opportunity lost. And if Borussia Dortmund do not win the title at the end of the year, they will be looking at this game and say, this is probably an even bigger impact than the Bayern fixture. Because you look, it feels like that Bayern are so vulnerable at the moment. And I said this, you know, after the Klassiker and when we had Matt Ford on here, that I feel that there will be more Bayern wobbles coming. And I think there's more coming. We have lots to discuss when it comes to Bayern Munich and all the issues that are going on there. But if you Borussia Dortmund, you need to capitalize.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first things first,
Yeah.
Stuttgart were tremendous in this game. Obviously, they went 2 goals down, and that's not great. But the way they responded was really quite remarkable. And even after going a man down, the way that they played in the second half was incredible in the sense that you never once thought that they were a team who were man down, which really suggests to me that, and anyone who watched, that just about every player on that pitch put in like 110% to kind of compensate for the lack of a player. And we've kind of seen this in recent weeks with this team. You know, they've got a new head coach. He's done a fantastic job there, and they're picking up points and results that suggest that they've maybe kind of turned a corner in a sense. You know, they've also got that Nuremberg result, the Pokal, but then of course that Bochum win last weekend before last, which was one that I think that kind of raised a few eyebrows actually. And they went into this game in the exact same kind of mood, to be perfectly honest with you, in the sense that they just didn't accept defeat at any stage of the game. And, you know, it's interesting that Terzic has kind of, as you said, maybe thrown the team under the bus or been very critical of the club, because I do kind of feel like a lot of the pain and anguish that Dortmund went through in this game could be kind of chalked up to Terzic's kind of in-game management. I feel like to a large extent Dortmund were quite limited. So what the kind of necessary context for this game is that Nico Schlotterbeck and Niklas Süle were both injured. So they had to start with a kind of back four, and it was Mats Hummels and Emre Can as the two central defenders. And I actually thought Hummels actually had a really good first half. He was really good at kind of playing that sweeper role. He kept, and like, because Stuttgart had a number of chances in the first half alone. I mean, pretty sure, they had 0.49 XG at halftime. So they were definitely creating chances. For one reason or another, Hummels goes off. He gets told he was ill. So he was throwing up or something in the changing room, and the club bring on young Koulibaly, and it just kind of went downhill from there. Now, obviously, people who watch the highlights of this game will see Koulibaly kind of swiping at thin air, much like Kobel did against Bayern in the lead up to that third goal. But I actually think, having watched the game, that over the course of the match, Emre Can, as a central defender, was just making one mistake after another mistake. He was constantly being caught out. He was constantly missing his players. He was losing his mark, the players he was supposed to mark, over and over again. And actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's either Stuttgart's first or second goal, he actually knocks it into the back of there, where, you know, it takes the ball there. I can't remember if it was Koulibaly, the Stuttgart Koulibaly took a shot, and then, you know, it head towards Emre Can. Can sticks a foot out, up kind of taking a touch on, and it takes away from Kobel, who was already diving the right way. And I feel like him and Koulibaly in defence was just a recipe for disaster. And Stuttgart, over and over and over again, just found ways to break through both of them. And I do kind of feel like there was a way that Dortmund, or Terzic in particular, could have avoided this. He had Marius Wolf on the bench, could have maybe moved Rierson in as a sort of, central defender. I know that's not ideal, obviously Rierson's a fullback, but you kind of have to look at this fact that Koulibaly is obviously extremely inexperienced. I'm not mistaken.
It was his debut.
I think I remember. And to come on in a game like this where Stuttgart are just throwing everything at you, alongside a player who is not only not a defender, but has already shown countless times that he kind of struggles to show that composure and the kind of level-headedness to kind of see out matches. And it just meant like Dortmund's foundations just completely crumbled. And like, I feel really bad for Koulibaly because he obviously makes the mistake that leads to the third goal. But by that point, Dortmund were already on the ropes because they just didn't have a defence that could have held up to any kind of pressure. And another thing as well that I think is maybe worth bringing up here as well, and again, this kind of goes back to the way this team is trained or the way that this team is kind of, is just looked after. And that is that Dortmund looked fantastic in the first half in the sense of going forwards. Daniel Malin was really good. I thought Julian Brandt was very sharp. Adeyemi was very sharp. Sebastian Haller was quite good. But in the second half, all these players began to just kind of drop off. Daniel Malin had probably the best 45 minutes of his season, or perhaps even of his Dortmund career in this game. And then the second half, he looked exhausted. Julian Brandt looked exhausted. Adeyemi exhausted. We've talked a lot about the way Sebastian Haller's kind of struggled to finish games recently. And I don't know. I just kind of feel like maybe I'm just a bit old-fashioned, but I feel like these players should be able to last 90 minutes. And I don't know. It just kind of felt like a very kind of weird thing that Dortmund's entire front line couldn't last 90 minutes of high-intensity football. And so then obviously Royce comes on, Mukoko comes on, Bayern Gittins comes on, Gio Reyna. And, I know these guys obviously created some chances, Reyna got the goal, but to completely, to not only have to play this extremely ropey makeshift defence in the middle of the game, but also to feel a need to completely change your attacking lineup, which was doing quite well in the first half. I think that just did so much to kind of completely destroy any sort of momentum or any kind of control that Dortmund had over this game. And I do feel like this is something we keep coming back to with Terzic. He is very, very good in certain aspects of coaching. There's no doubt that the players buy into what he's offering. There's no doubt that they do run through brick walls for him. He's managed to get a lot of the kind of players in this team who didn't perform under previous head coaches to perform for him. Daniel Malin's a perfect example of that. But Terzic, I think, has shown time and time again, specifically this season, that his in-game management is really lacking. And I thought this game was a perfect example of that.
Yeah, no, totally. I think the Koulibaly thing was like a big story, right? Like that he came on and then kind of gave away that goal. But I like a big aspect of it too. I think when you look at that goal, watch what Marco Reus and Gio Reyna are doing. I followed this on Twitter live, and then I watched the game and the highlights back. And one of the things that kind of stuck out to me is that they both just stop at the halfway line and, don't really engage or run back and do the work that is required in a situation like that. And I think with Marco Reus, with Gio Reyna, I mean, this is a well-known fact now, right? Like, we all know who he is as a person, and we all know that it comes with all these problems. And, he is a very good player. He's a very good prospect, but he's also he always has a bit of a personality that doesn't always, is 100% work ethic. With Reus, though, he's the captain of this team. And we're in the middle of contract negotiations at the moment. And, there was a article today that actually suggested that this game might further impact the way Dortmund are considering his future. Right. So I think that is a really interesting aspect here, is like, how are Dortmund going to approach this, going forward with Marco Reus? And what is the impact of this game? What happens if Dortmund don't win the title because of this result, is I guess what I'm going to say. Are they going to say we have to really change things over?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing is, and it just goes some way to kind of point it out that, this kind of, this Dortmund team just really lack any kind of experienced heads that can kind of see them through these games. Maybe Masumo's could have been that in the second half if he'd stuck around, but you look around that team, and this has always been my kind of issue with Royce as a kind of captain, and maybe this is just a problem with always having attacking players as a captain, is they don't really have the kind of defensive kind of mindset to be a kind of consistent or a kind of level-headed player in these kind of moments. Royce always wants to counter-attack. He always wants to run up the ball. He wants to dribble the ball. He always wants to score more goals. And in a game like this, that's not what you want. You want a player who's going to happily sit back, they'll track the runners, and they'll get stuck in. And I think another really telling thing for that third goal is that Jude Bellingham I actually did take a screenshot of this, and I was going to tweet it out, but I just didn't bother because I felt like he was already past the point. But as Stuttgart passed the ball out of defence for the move that leads to the third goal, Jude Bellingham, who's only one of two central midfielders in this team, is closing down the left back. And, Özcan's kind of left in the middle of the pitch on his own. I think Bayern Gitten's by that point to be beside him. And it's just little things like that. I think that that really made me think, that's the degree of inexperience that Royce has kind of shown himself up for there, because I feel like a more experienced central midfielder would have probably been standing square between central defenders at that point, saying, I'm going to put my body in the line for whatever comes up here in the next 30 or 60 seconds. And it was a deeply frustrating game for Dortmund fans, there's no doubt about it. And, I guess we're just going to have to wait and see how it leads to, or what it leads to, because obviously, as we're about to mention in the moment, Bayern kind of maybe did them a favour in struggling to win their own game.
This is where it gets really frustrating, right? I'm just pulling up the results here. Bayern against Hoffenheim. If you're a Dortmund fan, or any fan of any other team, I mean, Timo Werner made these comments after the Leipzig win, right, over Augsburg, the 3-2 victory. He was extremely frustrated with where Leipzig are at the moment because of Bayern continuously struggling to get results. And, we both kind of said in the previous show that we think that Bayern are going to beat Hoffenheim, but it wouldn't surprise us if this is a game where they drop points, because they have been so wobbly. And teams now go to the Allianz Arena and feel that this is a place where they can get a result, especially teams that still need to play for something. And it seems like up and down the table, everyone is still playing for something right now, right? So you're walking into way more situations where teams can get something. And yeah, the Andrej Kramaric free kick was gorgeous. A beautiful goal, how do you defend that? But that entire performance up and down, Bayern are almost in the same situation as Dortmund, that they're picking up points. Yes, they're first in the table, but their results are so inconsistent that they're almost as confused as the Dortmund staff. You look at Thomas Tuchel, his response to after the game. You look at Kahn, Hasan Salihamidzic, a lot of the players as well. There's almost like a confusion of what they are. It's almost, I think what happened here, and I think the Bayern bosses take some blame for that, is this coaching change increased the stress levels inside the squad and actually led to even more inconsistency, because, the doubt is now creeping in, right? The squad basically blames itself for not making it work under Julian Nagelsmann. And then all of a sudden it's like, now the doubt is creeping in. Or if Nagelsmann leaves, Tuchel comes in. Yes, we beat Dortmund in the Klassiker, but then we drop points twice in the league. And then there's this result in Manchester where a lot of individual mistakes ultimately to Bayern losing 3-0 and probably the tie. And we get to the second leg in a moment here. But I think at that moment, doubt is creeping in on whether, because the big point that the Bayern bosses made, right, Oliver Kahn said this over and over again at the Thomas Tuchel press conference, we believe this is one of the best squads in Europe. But what if the squad at the moment doesn't believe that? And that's almost how it feels. And then other teams, this soccer is cruel that way. If the opponent smells blood in the water, they're going to come for you. And I think that's what's going on. A team like Hoffenheim is now going to the Allianz Arena and saying, we can get a crucial point in a relegation battle here. And I think that's, if you're the rest of the Bundesliga, that is extremely frustrating because you have a Bayern side that is extremely vulnerable at the moment, that is probably not going to win all 6 remaining games until matchday 34. So if you're not capitalizing from that, when will you, right? And that I think is really interesting. So there's 2 things here, right? We're talking about the rest of the league not capitalizing from Bayern's obvious weaknesses, but there's also a lot of things going on at Bayern Munich at the moment that are a story in itself, right? And it starts with the coaching change, and it goes on to the 2 results in the Bundesliga. And of course, the big result in Manchester that, essentially is probably going to end their Champions League season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a really tricky situation for Bayern at the moment because you can tell that things aren't very happy. You can tell there's a lot of kind of discomfort behind closed doors. I think the Sadio Mane story that has followed the original Sadio Mane story. And what I mean by that is moving on from the news that he'd been suspended and fined for his altercation with Leroy Sané. There's also reports now that Bayern are all but set to let him go in the summer. That kind of came across to me as almost like kind of red meat that they were kind of throwing to the kind of ravenous masses of angry fans to kind of say, yeah, we know things aren't right. We're ready to crack the whip. We're ready to dump these star players if they don't perform. And I don't think this is going to be the end of it by any means. I really do think that, if Bayern get thumped off Man City this week, they crash out the Champions League and things don't turn around very quickly, I think Bayern could find themselves in a situation, or the club may find themselves in a situation where they're almost kind of forced to consider the future of a number of these kind of star players, not because they're not performing well, but also because there's that expectation from the fans to kind of fix this situation. And it's hard to fix this situation without maybe wholesale changes to this squad, because we spent all season kind of talking about this. The Hoffenheim game was a perfect example of this, in the sense that, they'd create chances. They probably could have scored more than they did. But there were just kind of moments where you thought, oh, they're just kind of missing something. Like Serge Gnabry in particular seems to embody this so well at the moment, where, he's not a striker, he's not a number 9, but he's still kind of making the right moves, but he's just kind of getting into positions but not finishing in the way a striker would. And, whether it's Choupo-Moting or Robert Lewandowski, I feel like if Bayern did have a number 9 in that team against Hoffenheim, they probably would have scored an extra 2 or 3 goals. And you're right. I mean, the Kramaric free kick was outstanding, and I don't think there's anything you can really do to save that. But I think in previous seasons, Bayern would have probably already been like 2 or 3 goals up by that point, and that's a consolation goal rather than an equaliser. So I think it's quite telling that there's so much kind of riding on whether Choupo-Moting will be able to play this Man City game. I think that in itself probably tells, Hasan Salihamidzic, Oliver Kahn exactly what they probably have to do in the summer, or unless Thomas Tuchel can sit them down and explain that he doesn't need a striker, but he needs X, Y, and Z. But it's a huge issue, and, I think most people will be listening to this just before the Man City game, so there's only so much we can kind of say, I guess, but I thought I don't know. I just think there's a lot going on in that club right now, and unless something quite dramatic happens, like they do turn around against Man City, which, to be perfectly honest, isn't impossible. Obviously Bayern are a different beast at the Allianz Arena when in the Champions League. If Choupo-Moting's back, then they look like a different team. I think it's actually quite telling that if you kind of look at the pass maps for Bayern in this game, it's once again, and we've seen this for about the last 2 or 3 games now, is this kind of like this, the front line just kind of has this semicircle of passes with no presence whatsoever in the box. And they look like a team who's a man down, to be perfectly honest with you. So Choupo-Moting could make a difference. Not that he's a world beater himself, but just having someone in that role who can take the passes, could make a big difference against Man City, even if he's not 100% fit. But we're just going to have to wait and see. I mean, they're in such a bizarre scenario because they've just appointed the head coach. Tuchel will probably win the Bundesliga, and then it'll probably lead to a really interesting summer where Bayern might have to kind of really make some difficult decisions, because, I mean, just looking at that kind of starting 11 against Hoffenheim, there's probably, 1, 2, 3, 4 players in that starting 11 who are probably maybe not sure if they're going to be at the club next season. Even more on the bench. So it's a really weird situation for Bayern. It's one that they undoubtedly, as a club, just do not feel comfortable being in this situation. Hence the kind of nickname FC Hollywood, because when Bayern are put on the back feet, they do panic very quickly. But I don't know. I do feel like there's a lot riding on this Man City game. Not in the sense that they have to win it, but if they can kind of do something to kind of regain their honour or regain some sort of composure, in the sense that, they go out heroically, they take the game to Man City, they score 2 goals, maybe Man City pull one back and then they get knocked out 4-2 or something. Even something like that suggests there is some fight in this team, and then they can go into the remaining run of fixtures, which, aren't actually that bad, to be perfectly honest with you. They've coming up, they've got, after the Man City game, they've got Mainz away, Hertha at home, Bremen away, then Schalke at home. I mean, that's 4 games that they could easily rack up maximum points, 15 goals, concede 1 or 2, and suddenly things look back to normal before what could be a tricky game against Leipzig, and then they've closed on the final day. So, I mean, unless something dramatic happens, their league season's almost entirely wrapped up, unless Dortmund can keep pace and then Leipzig cause an issue in a few weeks' time. But I don't know. It's just a very weird situation. I guess it feels like we're kind of in the eye of the storm right now, and we're waiting to see.
I think this Man City result is
of
going to be really telling on how it's going to go forward. You rattled off all these easy opponents. Mainz still playing for a spot in Europe, right? And they are the sort of team that Bayern has struggled against. Werder Bremen, okay, I don't see them doing much damage unless Niklas Füllkrug is fully fit, right? But then there's Schalke. They're the sort of opponent that is really playing for something. And it seems like whenever they are playing against someone this year who actually cares, they really seem to struggle. It's almost like they can't face a team that's facing adversity. And the Schalke is obviously facing adversity. So did Hoffenheim, right? And those teams now, because they sense the vulnerability of the opponent and they're so desperate themselves, they no longer just go to Munich or play against Bayern and say, oh, well, we don't need those 3 points. They're saying, these are 3 points. If we get them on top of what we already have, that's a huge bonus and we're going to go get it, right? And so I think that Schalke game actually could be one where I think, okay, well, what if they lose that? Or what if they draw it? And what if Dortmund actually are able to keep pace? Then you go to Leipzig, and then Leipzig, is a team that Bayern likes to drop points against. This could go really sideways for them, which of course would make our job a lot more interesting. But I think a lot of it will depend on this Manchester game, because, a good performance. Let's say they do the impossible and turn this around. And we've seen crazier things in the Champions League happen, right? Especially between 2 teams of the size. We all remember the Liverpool result against Barcelona in the second leg, right? A few years ago, where I think they turned over a 5-1 to a 4-0. It was something crazy like that. So it's not impossible that English teams have gone to the Allianz Arena and got absolutely smashed. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but if it does happen, I think Bayern Munich will be cruising to a Bundesliga title from here on out. If Man City go to Munich and do the same thing again that they did in the first leg, I think the house will be on fire. And then Tuchel will be so busy putting out all these individual fires, and little stories will be creeping up. Like that Ryan Gravenberg story, right, that he wants to leave. I think Bayern have no interest whatsoever in letting him leave, when we can probably discuss that in the transfer show later this week. But that's another fire now that's being put on by probably his agency, right? Suggesting that he wants to leave. And so Tuchel probably doesn't even know yet what to do with Ryan Gravenberg until next summer, right? But now he has to deal with it now. So you have that story going on. There's still stuff going on with Pavard. Now there's the story with Victor Osimhen, a striker coming in, another name mentioned. And so it's like, there's so many little things going on all at once. And it feels like the Man City result, a good Man City result, could put out a lot of these fires all at once. But if they lose in dramatic fashion, all of a sudden you have more fires. And I think the rest of Bayern Munich's season will be defined on Wednesday.
Yeah. I mean, just to maybe wrap this up, I mean, the two things that really stood out to me about why they appointed Tuchel was to instill some sort of discipline to this team, but to also get the best out of what they perceive to be a really talented group of players. And I don't think we've really seen that yet. Obviously, the discipline thing's going out the window, obviously, following the kind of what happened after the Man City game. But the individual performances just have not improved either. You know, you can go to that Man City game and say how, you know, key players in defence, you know, Upamecano's the most obvious one. But even up front, you know, Serge Gnabry gone missing, you know, midfield, whatever. And this team are still playing with the same kind of, you know, malaise or lack of interest that they apparently had under Julian Nagelsmann. So, you know, and that's what kind of brings us, and this is exactly what you're saying, like, you know, if we still see another one of those performances against Man City, and in particular, key individual players not stepping up to the mark, then it does kind of suggest there's something kind of deeper or more insidious going on in this Bayern team, that you do have a group of professional players who, after one head coach after another, you know, two really impressive head coaches in Nagelsmann and Thomas Tuchel. We're not talking about old, dusty old men here, like from previous generations who, you know, can inspire young players. We're talking about two guys who are at the top of their game when it comes to, you know, relating to young players nowadays. If neither of these two guys can get the best out of what is a really talented squad, then Bayern really have no option except to maybe start, you know, cutting into that team and just saying, right, well, we're going to need a massive rebuild. And that's when the kind of pressure gets put back on Hasan Salihamidzic, because, you know, the start of last season, everyone was kind of singing his praises because, like, wow, Sadio Mane, wow, Matthijs de Ligt. But, you know, 8 months on, you kind of look back in hindsight, and it really is with the benefit of hindsight. You say, well, actually, both those players are probably up for sale in the first place. Both those players had clubs that wanted to move them on. And maybe Bayern Munich just kind of walked into the transfer market and said, right, we'll pick them up at you know, at base level, because we know because both players want to move on. So, you know, it wasn't some master stroke. It's just the fact that Bayern signed the players that were up for sale, and really neither of them have really worked out tremendously well. And they haven't fixed the problems in this team. So that pressure then gets put on Salihamidzic because he's not solving the problems.
I like the De Ligt signing. Right, I think that is one that's going to work out. The Sadio Mane feels like one that just is not a good fit. It's interesting that his numbers are actually better than they were at the same time in Liverpool, but I think you can have good numbers and, you know, still not be a good fit. You know, like, numbers always don't tell the full story, in a sense that, do these numbers actually lead to better results, right? You know, because at Liverpool, there was two other guys that he had a really good chemistry with. And so his numbers maybe translated into bigger numbers for these other guys, whereas maybe it's almost like a subtraction in terms of output for Bayern, because it's just, you know, the way the puzzle piece is just not the right puzzle piece. And I think that is actually a really interesting story in itself. That, I mean, we've talked about this in great length, that, you know, the forward that Bayern Munich needed wasn't signed. You know, to this day, it's really telling that Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting is having the season that he's having, because, you know, he is probably the profile of a player that Bayern Munich did need to sign, just, you know, with more talented. And that's, I think, that is quite telling. And that will, you know, lead to questions concerning Hasan Salihamidzic and Marco Neppe's job, right? His assistant, who is the talent identifier. And you see these stories already creeping up. And, you know, you go online and know Twitter hellsphere isn't exactly a real representation of the real world. But, you know, a lot of people are really upset that Nagelsmann got fired and Tuchel came in, and the situation got worse for a lot of people's perception. And I think that is, you know, where the board is going to they will be asked some serious questions. What has Bayern made so successful, maybe to wrap this up, is that they rarely made a mistake over the last 10 years. And it feels like this year they have made some mistakes. And it could still lead to another Bundesliga team capitalizing from it, right? The question is then, will the mistakes that they have made this year, and this is the bigger question, right? Even if they do win the Bundesliga title this year, are the mistakes that they made this year lead to further mistakes this summer when they're trying to fix the previous mistakes? And you see, like, they're slowly creeping back to the mean that they had in the 1990s and early 2000s when other teams on a regular basis won Bundesliga titles, right? And I think maybe the era is coming to an end. And I mean, Bayern Munich is still probably going to win 50% of Bundesliga titles, but this era of being undefeatable within this league, I feels like that's slowly coming to an end.
No. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you kind of talk to Bayern fans, I think the thing they probably miss is just that kind of stability in the team. You know, I think probably the most, I mean, look, this entire team's had to be rebuilt. You know, you can go back to like the team that maybe, if you want to go back as far as like Jupp Heynckes with Pep Guardiola, from start to finish, this team's had to be rebuilt defensively. The only players who are still around, obviously, are Manuel Neuer and Thomas Muller. Maybe Kimmich and Goretzka get fit into that, but that kind of means that, you know, the front lines had to be replaced, the defense has had to be replaced, which I think is such a really big thing to do that's kind of overlooked, is that you know, the club still haven't really properly replaced Boateng and Alaba, but also the big thing that I think they missed that they had back then was Robin and Ribery. They just had two wingers who knew what they were doing every week. They knew how to put the ball in the back of the net, or they knew how to score, create goals for the striker. And I mean, obviously both those players had their injury concerns and some players had to fill in for them, but more or less you knew where you stood with those two players. Bayern now kind of have this array of attacking players who kind of mix and match and get swapped in and swapped out. And if, you know, if someone was to ask you, what does Leroy Sané play and what does he do in this Bayern team, you'd probably have to take like a 10-page spreadsheet just to explain it to them. Well, he does this sometimes and he does that sometimes, and it depends if they play with number 9 or if Goretzka's out that week and he has to play as number 8. Same as Serge Gnabry, you don't really know what he does in that team. Kingsley Coman, to his credit, who is also maybe a kind of go back to that era, and there's maybe a kind of understudy of sorts to Robin and Ribery, is a bit more like them in the sense that, you know, you could play him right wing for the whole season and you know what you get from him, and that's why I do feel like I often stick up for Coman in that regard. But it's just a problem with their whole team, and you know, and I think this is also an issue that not only is the squad had to be rebuilt, but the people who are in charge of building the squad has to be changed as well. You know, you've gone from Hones and Rummenigge to Hasan Salihamidzic and Oliver Kahn, and they're obviously learning on the job, and they're having to replace their predecessors just as much as Upamecano, you know, is having to replace his predecessor in the squad, and that's why Bayern are in the situation they're in, and why maybe the guy on the sideline with the tactics board isn't actually that isn't making much of a difference right now.
You know, obviously we're going to find out later this week what's going to happen next. This has been a fascinating story, and you know, that is fortunately is leading to a really interesting Bundesliga title race that is far from over, even with Dortmund slipping up. The gap is still only 2 points, but yes, we'll find out obviously in the next few days how the story continues. As always, the show is brought to you by Bet Online. I think, Stefan, this is a good point to wrap it up. Any final thoughts before we call this a day?
No, just to obviously, as always, thank everyone who subscribes, listens to the show. If you don't subscribe to our Substack, do give it a look. Even if you're not that interested in newsletters, that's where we stick all our extra shows. I think people enjoy them, and we've actually recently had a lot of fun kind of setting up threads and chatting to subscribers about things. We put one up for the match day this week, and I think it's had, last I checked, maybe 30 or 40 comments on it. So it's kind of developing into this fun little community for Bundesliga fans to
definitely. It's a fun place. It's great for us too, and it's actually, you know, often helps with ideas and thoughts, and you know, pointing us into directions and stories that, you know, otherwise we might overlook. So yeah, the community's been awesome. Give it a look. It's on Substack, and sign up. It's good. It's great fun. But that's it for us. For today's show. We'll be back later with the transfer show, then of course the Champions League reaction show. I'm still in LA. I've been asked this over and over again, Stefan. what's going on with the Bayern Munich LAFC deal. Well, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm in Los Angeles. I'm not here to actually just enjoy the sun. In fairness, the sun is actually not out today. I'm actually here to find out what's actually going on. And I have answers. So we're going to have answers on the podcast, but there's also going to be a feature article coming on Transfermarkt. So keep your eyes open on that, because I actually know all the details now. So, yeah, that's coming soon. So until then, we'll be back soon. Auf Wiedersehen.
Ende in Sicht.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.